Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rick Piña, and I am from the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society. I'm a U.S. Army soldier, soldier for life, retired, and I'm excited about today's Fireside Chat. The Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society is capturing the history of communications in the United States Army. Please visit our website, gordonhistoricalmuseum.org. Today, we are hosting Lieutenant General John Morrison, who is the Army Deputy G6. So, sir, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule from the Pentagon to spend a few minutes with us from the Historical Museum Society today. Let's start. I know you well. I've known you for 30 years, but not everybody on this call is going to know you. So can you please just share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing here in the Pentagon there as far as being the Deputy G6 for the United States Army?
Well, my name is John Morrison. The mere fact that you said you've known me for over 30 years means I've been in the Army over 30 years. I currently serve as the Deputy Chief of Staff G6, and I'm responsible, I serve as the Senior Military Advisor to the Chief of Staff of the Army and to the Chief Information Officer for all things network architectures, command control, communications, and cyber in support of worldwide operations. I've been in the Army a little over 34 years, or at least I think that's pretty close to it now. And I started off as a basic branch signal officer, and I've had the pleasure of serving in both signal and cyber assignments over these many, many years.
So, sir, I know that there are people watching who maybe served in the Army years ago or decades ago, and they remember some of the communications gear that we had in yesteryear, and we're going to get to that here in a few minutes. But right now, from your position, for representing the entire United States Army from a communication perspective, can you help us understand how big the Army network is and how you're running this global, always-on network on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, so when you take a look at the scope and scale of the U.S. Army network, it is global. And to your point, it is always on all around the world. And wherever there's an American soldier, that is where the Army network is. And so it is vast, well over 1.2 million users. And if you total it up across all classification of networks, it goes even higher than that. And that's a network that's got to be operated, maintained, and defended 24/7, because certainly our adversaries, they're trying to make sure that they can disrupt our operations, and they know that the network is foundational to everything that our Army does, whether it's operations, whether it's administrative, whether it's just a business function, whether it's training. Our network is the key enabler to just about everything you do in an information age Army. And that truly is what we are. You've heard the Chief of Staff of the Army talk about it all the time. We're moving from an industrial age Army to an information age Army. And the network is the central enabler to make all that happen.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to juxtapose what you just said, this state-of-the-art, global, always-on, actively defended network that enables soldiers to deploy anywhere in the world with short notice, with the capability to fight upon arrival. And we're going to compare that to, because this is for the Historical Museum Society, let's go down memory lane. I'm going to call out some things. Maybe you could tell me what you think of when I say TA 312 or SB 22.
My first switchboard and my first telephone.
So we've come a long way since then.
You have to talk about the cranks too, because that's how you made them ring. You started just cranking on them, and it made the other end ring.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you and I, when we met, I was working in the ANTTC 39 Alpha. That switch was a 744 line switch. It was analog and digital. And I met you when you came back from the Gulf War, but you deployed with that switch in the Gulf War. So my question to you is, when you think back to the Gulf War, and it's amazing that it was 30 years ago, that's crazy. But when you think back to that deployment and you deployed with this ANTTC 39 Alpha, this huge switch, what lessons did you learn back then supporting the warfighter in a combat operation that maybe you're still applying today?
So I'll give you a couple things. One is you are supporting, and I'm not really a huge fan of the term warfighter, like that's the small, distinct segment of the Army, because I think if you wear U.S. Army above your left breast pocket, you're a warfighter, regardless of branch. And I think that's really the big takeaway that I took from the Gulf War, is that we are all warfighters when it gets to combat operations. And as somebody that is supporting combat arms maneuver, you need to be intimately involved in the planning and execution of combined arms maneuver. And you bring your specialty. In our case, it was communications 30 years ago. And you bring your specialty and you make it an integral part of supporting that commander that is conducting combined arms maneuver. And that was really the biggest lesson I took away, because, quite frankly, I had some fits and starts as a young lieutenant in command of a company, learning that. But boy, I will tell you, those were lessons that stayed with me the rest of my career. And quite frankly, I've only worked for one signal guy in the last 20 some odd years. But it's that integration with maneuver forces and bringing things to them and then adapting very rapidly, because the enemy gets a vote, and adapting very, very rapidly those changing conditions on the battlefield so that the unit that you're supporting, or units, are always successful.
Yes, sir. We're going to have some people on active duty watching this as well, and those are great lessons to be learned. One of the things I really enjoyed about my military career is that, like you said, things that I learned in my first duty station, foundational, kind of tenets as a signaleer and as a soldier. I took many of those lessons and applied them to every opportunity that I had throughout my career, including walking the halls of the Pentagon. And so there are some lessons for those that are young soldiers today, young officers watching this. The lessons that you're learning now are lessons that, as a matter of fact, you're going to be able to apply even post your military career. So you and I, sir, we left Germany. We both went to Fort Bragg. At Fort Bragg, we were given an ANTTC 39 Delta. Actually, I got one of those before I left Germany. But with the 39 Delta, we moved from voice communications. We were primarily voice with the Alpha. We did some auto DIN and auto VON trunking and that type of thing for those of us that remember that analog type stuff. But we went over to this Delta and we started doing data. And what was interesting at the time, for those that remember, this was 92, 93 timeframe. Data at that time in the ANTTC 39 Delta was 16 kilobits or a whopping 64 kilobits per second. And then you and I went from Fort Bragg. Later on, we met again at Fort Hood. And that's when we started putting routers, like Cisco routers and switches. And we started doing 1 megabit links and even 4 megabit links. Now, that was back in the late 90s and then the early 90s in the Bragg days. I said all that to say this. When you think about what we're doing now today, the Army is running fiber, has undersea fiber, the satellite infrastructure that you have, microwave links that we have, not just in combat, but of course, on this global always on network. You're looking at 5G. When you juxtapose kind of like where we came from to where we are today, what are your thoughts on, the progression that the Army has made as far as embracing technology and then employing that technology to empower or enable the mission?
Well, I think that I'll offer a couple thoughts. I think it shows the tremendous adaptability of our Army and our soldiers and our civilians. I mean, that's one. So we'll take you and me as an example, right? A couple old dogs who had to keep learning new tricks all the way along the way as technology changed. And you see that across all of our great soldiers and civilians. But just as importantly, you watch our Army adapt these technologies and then really put them into operational use to achieve effects that, quite frankly, we would have never even thought of once soldiers and civilians started operating on stuff. You brought up the old packet switch days of 16 kilobits and 64 kilobits. But what was interesting to me back then, and I think it still holds true today, is it was a capability that was out there that nobody was quite sure how to use. But boy, people, soldiers and civilians, signaleers, really started figuring it out. And then they brought less tech savvy folks or maneuver commanders or maneuver staffs into the fold and showed them capabilities that would empower their operations. Wow. And that's been a journey. And I can give examples all the way up from, 1987 to 2021 of examples of that happening all the way along this wonderful journey. And so that's what I have found really most exciting is our people. And now you look at where the Army's going with multi-domain operations. Foundational to operating in all domains, to include the cyber domain, is the network. And the network needs to be operated, maintained, and defended by signaleers. And so not only was the past very exciting, watching the adaptability of our soldiers and civilians, I will tell you the future of where our Army is heading for the cyber and signal branches. The future is just absolutely unlimited, and the chance to impact how our Army operates, unprecedented.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to flow in that same vein and maybe ask you a question along those lines. So you and I have both had experience with the material development community, with the requirements community, with program managers and those that have to actually develop solutions, then issue that gear to Army units. And a lot of times we would get the gear and then they would come back and say, wow, I never thought you were going to do this with the gear, right? So from an ingenuity perspective, soldiers always find a way to make it work or find a way to make the equipment do something that even the people who manufactured the equipment never thought it was going to do. So from that perspective, obviously you've been, you commanded the Joint Communication Service element. You've had amazing opportunities to deploy all over the planet, really, with gear and in unique missions. So can you think of a couple of examples where there was ingenuity, where you never thought that this is what you were going to do with the gear, and then all of a sudden now here you are doing something that even the people that maybe trained your soldiers or sailors or airmen or Marines never expected?
Yeah, I think of a couple. I'll give one Army and one Navy example since you brought up the Joint Communication Support element. So the first one was when we were in Baghdad as a part of Task Force Mercury, 13th Signal Battalion with the 1st Cavalry Division back in the 2004-2005 timeframe. And watching a couple warrant officers named Scott Sunday and Andy Llanos put in a voice over IP network that was just unprecedented over a tactical network. And they came up with it. It was their engineering ideas. They were the ones that took the ATM, asynchronous transfer mode switches, capabilities that were inside the old legacy mobile subscriber equipment. And they created essentially their own network. And this network ended up supporting over 10,000 voice over IP phones. I mean, you couldn't find an old MSE phone except in a guard shack by the time the deployment was over. That was 2 warrant officers coming up with a way to actually take the equipment that they've been handed, employ it in a completely different way, dramatically increase the command and control capabilities of the division in contact. And that's the most important thing. So adaptability, innovation, in contact, operational effects, making up, just incredible soup to nuts. Boy, that is probably about the best example that I can come up with. I will tell you another one when I was in the Joint Communication Support element, and this was a young sailor. There was a young sailor that was a part of the element who came up with the kit let me read back up. He was complaining to me about the kit that he had deployed with, and he had several changes that he would like to make to it. So when he got back from the deployment, we put him in our engineering shop. We brought in several of the other team chiefs from across the element, Army, Air Force, and Navy, and said, "You don't like the kit, you design the next version that we're going to field across the element, and you're going to deploy with it." And they did. And that literally has become that kit designed by soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that we're going to be team chiefs that deployed with that kit. Literally, is the foundation of everything we're doing with the Army's Expeditionary Single Battalion Enhanced today. Soldier ingenuity. I mean, it's just never ever ceased to amaze me.
Yes, sir. That's one of the things I really loved about the Army is when we would get funds, whether it be end of year funds or some type of mission funds or et cetera, and either you or one of my leaders will say, "Hey, Rick, we have X amount of dollars, and what are we going to do with it?" And we would come up with things, and it was a lot of fun, and then get to deploy with it, which was amazing. Which leads me to my next question is going to be around coalition networks. So you and I deployed to Bosnia, and when we got there, you mentioned mobile subscriber equipment. So during our Fort Hood days, we had MSE equipment that was, at that point, 18, 19, 20 years old, and we were adding all this stuff to it to modernize it. But when we got to Bosnia, we were in a situation where we had this stabilization force, S4 forces, and there were units there that were NATO and then non-NATO. And we had to provide one network for us to communicate to all of these coalition forces. And the main network had historically been MSE, and MSE was always a secret high network. We were the first unit to declassify the MSE secret high network to something other than that. We classified it to secret releasable to S4. And then going back to ingenuity, you sent me all over Bosnia on helicopters to install these NESs, network encryption systems. For those that are watching today, encryption devices today are smaller than this, but back then these things were like 50 pounds. And so, here we are like traveling all over Bosnia installing these network encryption systems, which were very fidgety back then. And we created this network. We had to tunnel US Secret through the MSE network, and then we basically opened up the MSE network to the coalition forces. And to your point, sir, I don't know if you remember, we had these little Sprint phones that we made those secret, and we had to convince everybody that that was a secret phone, and the G2 was freaking out and all of that. So my question to you is, that being the case, coalition requirements, coalition forces. Obviously, many people don't think that we would ever deploy again without coalition forces, and having a requirement to communicate with our coalition partners in a classified way. So what are your thoughts on coalition forces, the coalition requirement, and fighting in this type of coalition contested environment?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that agree that we will never deploy again without partner nations being by our side. Matter of fact, I don't think, save for humanitarian assistance operations here inside the United States, Hurricane Andrew as an example, I can't remember one time I've ever deployed without partner nations being by our side. And so I think that coalition networks are here to stay. I think they're absolutely vital. I think that we need to work through many of the policy challenges that come with that. And then we need to establish, especially with, some of our mainstay partners, a persistent presence that allows us to communicate in a secure manner and share the right levels of information. And it's possible, because we have several efforts ongoing right now to go ahead and get that persistent environment up, because it, much like the Army network, needs to be always on, because you never know when the next crisis is going to come. And no matter when the next crisis comes, you're going to want to be able to talk to your partners in a secure manner that is very, very defensible. I hope that answers the question, Rick.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very much so. And then I'm going to shift a little bit to like force management and doctrine. because you spent some time at Fort Gordon as well as the commander of the cyber COE. And it's interesting that I point that out that you commanded the cyber center of excellence and not the signal center of excellence, which leads me to a question around signal and cyber. So you and I both grew up signal. I like to say that I still bleed orange. There's a lot of orange in my office here. We were both around when the cyber branch was stood up. So we went through that process. We assisted in a lot of the things that were being stood up from a cyber perspective. And then doctrine-wise, we had to figure out the relationship between signal and cyber. So here we are years later in 2021. Where do we stand? What is the relationship like between signal and cyber? How is it going? How is the cyber branch developing? Where do you see signal in the future? Any thoughts around that? Sure.
So I'll offer a couple thoughts. So when cyber first came along, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth, among some of the traditional branches, and Signal was one of them. And I'm just being candid. I think those days are gone. I think that there is a growing, it's still evolving, but there's a growing understanding of who does what. I would submit to you that operations, maintenance, and defense, notice I don't just say merely secure, of the network is something that is absolutely in the Signal Corps' lane. Our new doctrine, FM 3-12, cyberspace and electronic warfare, calls out that DODN operations is the foundation for all cyber operations. DODN operations is that operations, maintenance, and defense of the Department of Defense Information Network, purely a signal regiment job. And quite frankly, there's more than enough work for everybody to do. This is all about combined arms maneuver in and through cyberspace to include the electromagnetic spectrum. And so the signal regiment has its role. Cyber has its role, both on defense, where they're very, very threat focused, and they're more point targets, much like a special operations team. They go in, they take care of the threat and harden the network and leave and turn it back over to the folks that are your terrain owners, i.e. the DODN operators. And on the offensive side, it was really sort of a silly debate when you really think about it. Because without the network, there is no cyber. There certainly isn't any defensive cyber, and there certainly isn't going to be any offensive cyber. So there's a role for everybody here, and that's what I'm pretty excited about. And I go back to this notion of combined arms maneuver in and through cyberspace to include the electromagnetic spectrum, because that is a key pillar for multi-domain operations. The Army wants to operate in that space. So my message to any member of the Signal Regiment, any member of the Cyber Branch, you're an operator. And it is about combined arms maneuver in and through cyberspace to include the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Since you talked about defending the network, then let me ask you a question about cybersecurity. So for those of you that may not be familiar, the Army has, we've already mentioned a couple of times, this global, always on, actively defended network. But there's also a component of the network that deploys. And so that can either get on whatever transportation mode to go anywhere in the world and then connect back. So that network is attacked every second of every day for the most part, at least attempted attacks. And it has to be protected and actively defended. So from that perspective, sir, you have this global network and you have people around the globe at regional cyber centers that are actively defending it. What is the Army doing to stay ahead of the cyber threat? Because the cyber threat, as you know, is real.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rick. So I will tell you that from my perspective, certainly in my career, the Army is in the greatest shift and in the midst of the greatest change in the Signal Regiment yet. And it is around that whole notion of establishing a global DODN ops, that operations, maintenance, and defense framework across the entire Army. Many of you know that we are transforming our expeditionary signal battalions into much smaller, lighter, more capable expeditionary signal battalion enhanced. That comes with a personnel, I'm going to call it dividend, but the ability to reinvest personnel into other missions that the Signal Regiment, and to a limited extent the Cyber Branch, but primarily the Signal Regiment, should have been doing all along. And that really gets after that notion of defense and that DONOPS framework, whether it's at the DONOPS center that's underneath the Network Enterprise Technology Command, all the way down to the BCT level. And then how does that framework with the right tools so that you can see, operate, and defend the network? How is that all layered in from a C2 perspective? Because what we want to do is bring complexity up. You know, the way we were building the Army network was very, very focused on our brigade combat teams, but we were putting way too much complexity there. We actually want a unit to be able to deploy in and plug in and have a defensive overwatch that's provided by somebody else to reduce the complexity of that force that's trying to maneuver. That, trust me, that's hard enough already. I mean, maneuvering a formation and providing comm support is already a really tough job. You know, so you want to take some of that complexity and provide it up so that you got the right tipping and queuing of intel coming down. And then the person that's actually maneuvering that formation can actually react to a threat or have somebody else take care of it for them, as opposed to just trying to shove all that complexity down into a Brigade S6 shop, as an example. And so it is a real exciting time for the Signal Regiment as we get much, much smaller, lighter, and more capable formations. And then we're able to go ahead and realign personnel to get after these long-standing wicked challenges that we've had for a long, long time.
Yes, sir. So as you were saying that, I was thinking of the many meetings that I had inside of the Pentagon related to what you just said, and how we would go round and round off of either pushing technology down or providing capability up, and then whether or not the brigade combat team wanted to rely on something that was on the other end of a satellite hop, and et cetera. And one of the challenges that we ran into, and maybe those of us that were successful were able to kind of take what I'm about to say and turn it around to become an asset and not a liability. But once upon a time, when we used to have like green boxes 30 years ago, signal bubbas were the signal folks who really kind of knew their lane, and maneuver forces oftentimes stayed out of our lane because they didn't really see it themselves as experts in our lane. But that has changed significantly, and now everybody's a communicator and everybody sees themselves as an expert. So that being the case, how do you, right now you're dealing with obviously the staff, the senior staff of the Army, the Sec Army, the Chief Staff of the Army, the Undersecretary, and the Vice Chief Staff of the Army, and then commanders around the globe, as their understanding of communications has increased. And now you're having discussions like the one that you just mentioned. Are they more involved? And is that advantageous to you, as far as obviously the discussions are much different than maybe they were in the past?
Yeah, you know, I think that's actually a great point. You know, so it's almost one of those stories of a funny thing happened on the way to the market. You know, so you're right. I mean, back in the day, you would keep the network up and you'd hear, you know, the signaleers running around going, "My network." Wow, that has changed. It is a commander's network now, and rightfully so. Because commanders have got to own it, because it is a key enabler to what they're going to try and go do operationally. And it doesn't matter what kind of formation you are. The network is going to be something that is absolutely critical to the success of your mission. And so I actually find it very advantageous, because they may not know how to do a signaleer's business, but they sure know the output and the capabilities they want the signaleer to provide. And they sure know when they want those capabilities provided. And so I take you all the way back to the lessons of the Gulf War, learning about being integrated in combined arms maneuver. If you're integrated into that combined arms maneuver, while the conversations are a way a lot easier than they were back in 1993. Because the commander now, I find commanders at all level much more savvy on what it is that's going to be provided to them out of a six shop, and quite frankly, when they want it and where they want it on the battlefield. And so, again, it's all about integrating and being a warfighter, being that operator and being a part of combined arms maneuver.
Yes, sir. I was of the same mentality, and I always saw it as an asset that we had people talking about the network and owning the network, infantry officers, armor officers owning the network in a way that they had never owned it in the past. And I saw that as a tremendous benefit to us. And I'm glad you see it the same way. So, sir, you've been very gracious with your time. Last question is going to be about people and the future. When you think of signal, cyber, EW, when you think of soldiers and civilians and contractors, and you go around and you talk to these folks, what excites you about the people that we have in the force today? And then what are you excited about as it relates to our future?
That's interesting. So what excites me about our future? The people, not the technology. I mean, the technology is going to come, but it's going to be brought by people. It's going to be implemented by people. And, so when I think about the future, and quite frankly, what gives me great hope is our people. And it just never ceases to amaze me over these many, many years how you can just watch folks, no matter how crummy the conditions, no matter how tough the environment, make a joke and figure something out that you never ever thought was going to be possible, or come up with something that is going to make it better or fix a problem. When you just thought that some shot was going to be down and, you were going to have to replace a rig, it always came back to the people. And so what gives, what gets me excited about the future? The people. And that's what I tell them. I mean, as we move towards multi-domain operations, if you're in the signal or cyber branch, you should be pinching yourself, because you're just going to be a key part of where our Army wants to head and how our Army will fight in the future. And so that's pretty heady stuff, and I would submit to you that it's a responsibility for everybody, whether a soldier or a civilian or one of our contractor teammates, that you need to be that key enabler. And you need to think of what a maneuver commander's requirements are before they do. And you need to be as proactive as our predecessors were previously. You need to do that in the future, maybe even more so. But it's never been about the technology, Rick. It's always been about the people taking a technology and making it work and making it be that critical enabler to support operations. So I am very, very hopeful for the future. I'm excited about it. And so when I walk around and I talk to folks, that is my message. It's an exciting future, and it's an exciting time of change in our Army, in the Signal Regiment, and in the Cyber Branch. It is just a important time, and I am excited because of our people.
Thank you very much, sir. Once again, on behalf of the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society, I want to thank you for taking your time today with us. If you are a young officer or soldier watching this and you are part of the Signal Regiment or the Cyber Branch or EW for that matter, I hope you heard what General Morrison just said. You are the future, and we're excited. If you are those that have gone before us and you remember communications gear even before that predates what I mentioned today, I hope you know that our future is in good hands. General Morrison, thank you once again. To you that are watching, please visit our website. I'm going to flash up the website on the screen. And also, please save our story. If you have information, go to the website and share pictures, share stories so that we can save the story of communications in the United States Army. Thank you very much for your time and attention.